I think like math and the numbers behind it and like the charts that we're able to present are always such a powerful tool for convincing people, for argumentation, for persuasion. When you're trying to present a case that you've really done your homework and that you understand what you're doing, seeing the hard numbers behind it and showing that we've done a simulation based on your actual data is a really powerful tool to be able to show that you've done your homework, right?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our podcast, The Automation Journey. I'm your host, Marissa Dierlam, Head of Marketing for TGW North America. Today, I'm joined with two excellent colleagues to talk about something I think maybe that gets a little bit underestimated, and that's data analysis as a part of designing our solutions. I'm looking forward to really kind of diving in and talking about what we uncover with data and the value that it provides. Before we get too into the weeds, though, can you guys introduce yourselves?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Natalie Vruwink. I've been with TGW for a little over 10 years now, and it's not my first job out of college. So I've had a little bit of industry experience before from the customer side, getting to understand like what a customer needs when they're approaching a sales team. I've served several different roles within the sales team, basically everything from design all the way through costing, and now I do solution design. And a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to create the data consultant role here at TGW. So that was a really exciting opportunity for me with my background in mathematics to be able to bring some technical expertise to TGW and help expand what role we're able to play when we're consulting and helping the customer early in that stage.
Awesome.
And I am Daniele Bongiovanni. I'm a data consultant at TGW in the sales department. I've been with the company for almost a year, but in the industry for 10 years. And indeed, our role sits in between sales and the raw data that the customer provides us so that we can provide a good foundation for the solution.
Yeah, so maybe to set the foundation then and baseline, what data exactly are we talking about? What does a customer hand over to us and when do they hand it over?
Yes, I would say for sure the most common kind of data that they provide us is sales order data. So that tells us what's been ordered, when, how much of each, and how it's been shipped. Most of the time, that data comes paired with inventory information that instead tells us what's been stored, how much, how it moves through the warehouse. And I would say the third layer into this is growth expectation. So what we are designing is not just today, but we're looking in the future. We're looking at what the customer wants to do in 3, 5, 10 years. And so those three things become the foundation indeed for our design.
And then when do we get that from our customers? Is it like asking after an RFP comes or how does that kind of look?
Yeah, it really depends on how a customer is prepared for automation and what kind of things they're expecting. I found anything from a customer who's totally new to automation and needs help figuring out where a solution from TGW could even fit their needs. They might come to us without an RFP ready, without a consultant picked out. When they're talking to someone like business development, they'll reach out, they'll send out some examples of like ideas they have or of some starting data that they have. And that would mean we get to get involved really early and we get to do some really rough analysis, help them do some figures that help them just understand what they can expect in the next couple stages of sales. What some of our colleagues in Europe might see is the entire opposite of the end of the spectrum, where they've had a project that's been worked on with a consultant for a year or two already by the time the sales team gets to see it.
Yeah.
And so then there's an RFP, but there's not even any data package attached to it. It's just like, here's the answers and you guys need to figure out a solution to solve it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So what are some of the biggest challenges in data collection and analysis from your experience?
I mean, for me, I think what I was mentioning earlier, the fact that we have to manage looking backward into the data and planning for the future. So as I was saying, customer usually comes to us that they want to change something in their business. Maybe they want to expand in a new market. They want to add SKUs to their portfolio. They want to grow faster. And so I think our role is very key in making sure that we understand well what has happened, and that's what the data tells us. But at the same time, we need to work together with the customer to fill it in with all the gaps that the future might hold, and they might know better than us. So that's for sure, I would say, one of the biggest aspects that I always find challenging, but also probably one of the most fun to work with them.
Yeah.
I also find like all the satisfaction comes in the things that are really challenging and that are surprising and are different every time. And I'd say one of the things that shows up there is like assuming and figuring out what you don't know that you don't know. So the ways our team is best able to combat that is just to have conversations directly with whoever's gathering the data and then whoever's making assumptions and expectations based on that. We want to talk with ops managers and understand what they hope to do with the system. We want to talk with, data teams over on the customer side and make sure that we're getting the raw stuff and that we're not getting something that's been filtered through a couple lenses before we're touching it. Those assumptions have a big impact on the analysis we're going to be doing.
And is it usually pretty easy to find those people who are the closest to the data in the real life?
It depends, right? Sometimes you get somebody who's happy to jump on a call and it's no problem. And sometimes you get a couple layers of people who say, well, no, like they prefer to work behind their desk and they'd rather have me talk to you, talk to them. And
yeah. So once the foundation is laid, you have a good data set, you find the right people and you're talking to them. Let's talk about what comes next and maybe some of the first things that you're uncovering. So what are some of the first insights you're looking to draw from the data?
Yeah, I would say definitely the very first thing we're looking for is trying to understand the level of performance that we need to design the system around, because that becomes pretty much the very first thing that's going to drive our solutions. But in general, in the data, we can see like a big picture can emerge. We can see, for example, SKU velocity. We can derive which one are the fast-moving SKUs versus the slow movers. We can understand better the order diversity, so the different kind of SKU combination within the orders. And those are the very first thing that we'll be looking into data.
And is it usually pretty obvious, or does it take some time to dig into it?
It really depends. Sometimes it also depends on the type of customer. I would say there are some customers that maybe comes to us with very clean data, well organized, and they know exactly what they're looking for. Vice versa, we might have customers that they're early in the automation journey, so maybe they need a bit more coaching. So it really depends, but typically it's not super straightforward.
Yeah.
I would say one of the first things you have to do with a customer is to go through the raw data and have like an understanding what do these columns mean, because sometimes it could be just the combination of million columns to get out the order number. So you never know.
Yeah.
This is where like our industry expertise can come in really in handy. When we're able to notice patterns and see something that looks different from what we've seen before in an industry, then it might not be obvious what the reason is, but at least we can figure out where we need to start asking questions. And that helps direct our early inquiries to figure out like, why is this a little bit different, right?
When you're also looking at the data, can you usually glean what is the best picking strategy for them, whether it's batch or discrete or a little bit of both? Does that also kind of come through in the data?
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say that, for example, you can expect that if a customer is managing a wide variety of SKUs and wide variety of shipping sizes, that then the picking strategy could be different from a customer that maybe focuses more on high volume SKUs, ship them in bulk. And so that's where I think our role is also very important to understand what is the right balance between the performance needed and the flexibility that we want to put into the system. And that's where also I think our solution can shine. Like talk about FlashPick. It's a really flexible kind of system that is able to, and it's designed to manage a wide variety of order profiles very efficiently.
So FlashPick is able to kind of do whatever is needed. Does it have that kind of level of flexibility, or is there some gray area?
Yeah. There's some complexity to that, and we wouldn't say that like FlashPick is the one size fits all solution to absolutely everything. But of course, FlashPick is really flexible to changes in order profile. FlashPick is prepared for changes in order priorities. If we find that something all of a sudden becomes a really high priority and we need to move it through very quickly, that's a great fit for FlashPick. As we're evaluating batching, this is something where it's nice having like just one team who's all in charge of handling the data, that we're able to build models and test models for multiple different solutions, whether that's flash pick or something similar that involves batching, and test and just see what those models would predict the system would behave. So then we can give an educated discussion with the customer and make sure they're making an educated decision about which direction they want to go with their solution.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it'd be interesting also to talk about peaks in data and the connection between data and peak season. So let's talk about what data reveals and what can be learned from that. So what do peaks usually tell us, and how is that important for the solution?
Yeah, I would say that peak is definitely one of the most important part of the data analysis. I think typically the first thing we're trying to understand is the shape of the peak. Like, are we talking about multiple consecutive days with a surge in volume, or are we talking about like a spike days scattered throughout the year?
Sure.
Because that could derive a different kind of solution to the challenge. So for example, if indeed you are building a system that's going to expect a build up for maybe an holiday season, so many multiple days with high volume, then maybe that justify increasing the throughput into the system we're proposing. Vice versa, if we're talking about a spike here and there, maybe we can leverage operational flexibility, like maybe extending the SLAs slightly, or adjusting the operational shift, adding manual stations just temporarily. And I think that's also another important part of our role, because we want to make sure that the solution is designed at the right level of design rate, let's say, because we want to sit in between the average and the peak. We don't want to provide a customer with a system that is oversized, that maybe is underutilized for most of the year. So peak is definitely a very challenging topic and important when designing the system.
And are you seeing any trends related to peak? Like, are things getting peakier or anything like that?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I said I wouldn't commit to saying that there's a huge overall trend across every industry where peaks are peakier. I think we could say that's true during certain seasons, and over 10 years it changes a lot and goes up and down. What I do notice is that we see trends within micro industries, or like little clusters of areas, where when a customer or an industry is getting more experience, they're able to control their peak better and predict when it will happen, understand how it will affect their operations. And those things mean that peaks don't affect them as much. Whereas when an industry is just starting to get into automation and they're still used to a fully manual system, they might be completely taken by surprise every time a peak happens, because they're used to being able to just flex labor and add a whole bunch more heads to the warehouse and solve it that way. So that's where, the level of experience that someone has in their industry, in the type of automation that they're looking for, affects how their peaks happen, because it changes how their customers behave when they market differently, but it also affects how they're able to respond to it and how it's going to affect them down the road.
Yeah, they can get a little bit smarter about their approach to it then. Yeah. Can the data you're analyzing even uncover something as granular as maybe a specific workflow that's a bottleneck, or even like a worker that's working too hard and things aren't getting through? Do you have any examples of that?
Yes. I think it's actually, again, another part of our job that is very rewarding when you are kind of like discovering these nuances in the data. And that's why sometimes it's right to say that averages maybe don't tell the whole truth. Like whenever you look at the data, sometimes it's important to look at it granularly. So usually the example I bring up is the fact that imagine that you're trying to understand the average number of items that been picked per SKU. Just maybe looking at the average, it might look normal, nothing jumps out. But then if you look at the distribution, how it spreads, you might notice that there are some SKUs that are ordered recurrently in large quantities. Maybe you see that every day there's an operator picking hundreds of items of this SKU. If you just look at the averages of the average, that's completely masked by all the other SKUs. And so in those kind of situations, maybe you don't need to invest too much into the solution to solve that issue. Maybe it's just a different operational tweak that can solve the issue. For example, you might want to pre-bag these items so that instead of having an operator picking hundreds, you have an operator picking a handful of bags. So that's those kind of things that really add a lot of value when you look into the data deeply, and so that you have pretty much the same result with zero added effort and also much less physical straining on the operator.
I think my favorite example of this is one that you were working on recently. We've got a grocery project that's in the process of realization right now, where we're trying to understand and help the customer understand what things are impacting the average performance that they're seeing out of their palletizers. And the average performance is not a good metric for understanding why it's happening. So we can see that like it's changed and every day it's different, and we want to understand what's causing that. So you were able to dig in and create new metrics that help us dig into a specific palletizer and then a specific task that one palletizer is doing, and understand is it working? Is it waiting? What is it working on? What is it waiting for? And that was really cool to me.
No, exactly. That's also kind of our niche role sometimes. We try to help the other department with this kind of exercises.
So you guys kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, that some of the trickiness of data is it's looking back. But when someone is trying to automate, they're looking forward and saying, well, I want to change how things are. So how do you work with a customer to plan for the future they want and to use data to model what that future could look like for them?
Yeah, part of that is starting from the assumptions that we have to make. So we talk with customers about what they want to happen and what they wish would happen and what they're worried about could happen, right? So we have to be prepared for all of those eventualities and figure out how we will prepare a system that will be ready for whatever could come. And then that goes to some of the models that we've built, where we have the ability to plan for growth that could happen and growth that happens in different ways, right? Because we always expect orders to grow. But when customers say we're growing by adding new SKUs and we expect to have people ordering more of different things, that's a really different kind of growth and a different impact on the system compared to a customer who might say, we expect to grow by just selling the exact same things to more and more customers every year, right?
Yeah. And even thinking like geographically, like, okay, we're expanding now to Canada. That's very different. Yeah. So how much predictive or scenario planning are you usually doing? Is that a lot of iterations as you're figuring out the right sort of assumptions with the customer?
Yeah, definitely. I think what we try to do is to put together different future scenarios, like Natalie was explaining. I think it's very important that in this process, the customer is involved. We don't want to be working in a bubble. We don't want to just go away with the data and crunch a number and come with a verdict. The key, I think, is really if we are able to engage with the customer, that we're making decisions together, so that together with them, we can define these scenarios. We can show them, okay, if you want to add 20% of the SKUs, you want to double down on e-commerce, that's how the solution will be affected. And this is how much will be the investment. But if we do this kind of exercise collaboratively, it becomes also much easier for them when you have to present it maybe to their board, because it becomes their own business case. So I think the key is indeed collaborate, define what are these scenarios and how they affect the solution.
Yeah, and I would imagine too that it lowers the overall risk too, that you don't design things the wrong way, to put it like very simplistically. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. The more times you check in, the less surprises you're going to have later on in the process. And the more you're able to explore all of the different impacts of what you're talking about, the more everybody's going to be prepared for what could happen. I also want to put in a plug here that like the communication with the customer is really important. And that's why we bring in the entire design team at that point too, because then the solution designer, the application engineer, everyone else is able to help guide to sweet spots that we might find for our automation, find spots where we're able to optimize costs, and even make guidance on what assumptions we might have behind the data analysis that might impact later on what solution we end up choosing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's transition to the value that all these insights actually bring, both for us as a systems integrator trying to right size a solution and make sure it's the right solution, but also for our customer. So then what does it look like? You're kind of touching on this a little bit. What does it look like to kind of hand off these insights to the team that is developing the solution? How are they kind of closely involved?
Yeah, I think it's a very much of a team effort in the end. Primarily, the first team we'll be working with is the simulation team. So all the data, the insights we collected will feed directly into them, because they're all their goal is to model and prove that the system will perform as expected. So they will be stressing against the peak demand. They will be looking at what are the limits of the system. And similarly, all that information then feeds also into the realization team. They are looking more into the physical implementation of the system. And so knowing ahead of time, these are the situations where the system will be mostly stressed, really helps in designing the system around durability, resilience. So I think those are the primary theme we try to convey all the information we collected so that it's not lost.
So if you have bad or unreliable data, or maybe we misinterpret or make assumptions that the customer doesn't agree with, what negative consequences can that have for the design?
Yeah, I mean, if the data is incomplete or it's misleading and we don't catch it, I think two things can happen, or multiple things. But the two things I can think of is we either over-design the system and the customer ends up with a system that is underutilized, or vice versa, a system that doesn't meet the actual real demand. So overall, the customers suffer because they invested in a system that doesn't meet their expectation. But I think what we were talking about earlier, the fact of really striving for a collaborative effort, is kind of our quality control process. So we want to have the customer always involved. Like Natalie was saying, we really want the customer to ask us questions, because as soon as we see that something that the data is telling us doesn't match their experience, that is a flag that we want to dig into and we don't want just ignore. So I think that is the key point to solve it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to imply that like having conversations early means we can predict the future perfectly, because things still change, right? We've had that where we sold a project that we were really happy with. The customer was really happy for the first year, and then their business changed over the next 4 years, and they found out that they were a little underutilized on their systems. They were trying to figure out what else can we use our system for. And that's where like you can bring the sales team back in, you can bring in more data analysis and say, hey, like, here's the unused capacity that we have in our site. Here's all the capacity that we have in our entire network across the US. What could we be shifting in terms of volume to the site to be able to use the automation more effectively?
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because it's like we can only do so much as between TGW and the customer, but the customer's own teams have to be talking to each other too, like making sure that the supply chain team is on the same page as the sales and business development and marketing, and like all their own teams have to be talking to each other on the same page too. But then, even like you said, then it's still not a perfect crystal ball either. So how does having the data analyzed help our customers besides just right sizing? Does it help them justify the investment when they are going to their board or to their own investors and saying, this is what we want to do?
Definitely. I think like math and the numbers behind it and like the charts that we're able to present are always such a powerful tool for convincing people, for argumentation, for persuasion. When you're trying to present a case that you've really done your homework and that you understand what you're doing, seeing the hard numbers behind it and showing that we've done a simulation based on your actual data is a really powerful tool to be able to show that you've done your homework, right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you both for these insights. Maybe to wrap this up, one last question for you both. If you had to summarize this whole thing, or like 1 to 2 key takeaways, what do you hope our listeners really gain from this conversation about data analysis?
Yeah, from my side, I would say kind of what you hinted at the beginning, that data, it's really the foundation for the solution. So you should just look at that as an afterthought, because if you design a system and you look at the data at the beginning thoroughly, the system will be performing as expected at the end. And the other thing I kept maybe mentioning many times is the fact that it's really, really important to work collaboratively with the customer. This is really the foundation of the whole solution. So making sure that we are looking at the data the right way, making sure that all the assumptions are validated, that we are aligned with what the customer is looking for, it's only beneficial for the other step into the system.
Yeah. We've talked about how important data is, how like exciting it can be and interesting and all those kind of things. But I also want to say like it can be a little bit intimidating, a little bit frustrating. It's not what everybody wants to talk about.
Yeah.
And what I want to convey to anybody who's like not had a chance to work with us is that Daniele and I, and basically everybody in the solutions department at sales, what we do is we communicate and we help educate the customer in the process of understanding their own system. So we're excited to get involved and teach you about what you don't know about what you don't know, but also help you be able to harness the tools that you already have and be able to communicate more effectively with your team about the stuff that is going on behind the data. And so, yeah, like the more time we're able to get with people who are not excited to talk about numbers, I find I can convince them, right? It's fun to get somebody excited about a chart.
Yeah, or at least feel more comfortable with something that feels really technical sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for these insights. I really appreciate your time. I think it's can be interesting to get into these more technical topics like this. That's all for this episode. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll stay tuned for more episodes of The Automation Journey.